Um, we are going to be in Matthew for a good chunk of today. But because we're looking at sort of what is beneath the text, we're not going to exegete it in a lot of detail, but we'll spend some time in Matthew 1, no doubt. Remind you what it is that we're trying to do, and that is we're trying to explore what was Jesus' childhood like. Now, we don't know if he, spent every 4 summers watching the World Cup or not. We just don't know those sort of details. What sort of games did he like to play? Did he ever spend time at his grandparents' house? We just can't do those sort of things. But there are a few things I believe that we can gather regarding his childhood, and maybe not say definitely this is what he went through. Although this isn't typically what we do, because we usually just take a passage, we devour it and whatnot. I do think doing so will illuminate Scripture. Maybe next week we'll see this. We'll talk about what did Jesus have in mind when he said a city on a hill. Did he have a specific city in mind? Very possibly so. And what can we say about that city, and why would he use that as an illustration? So I want to remind you what it is that we did last week. This is, I'm not going to draw it up here. I know my handwriting's terrible. This is a very generic, oversimplified timeline of the intertestamental period, okay? So right around here, we have the end of the Old Testament. Remember that the Persians take over the Babylonians. Ezra, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, Haggai, Zechariah, all of them, they go back home. Some stay where they are. That would be the story of Esther and the Jews. But a remnant do return, takes over the land. That is the period of the Greeks. Alexander dies. His kingdom falls into 4 period here. Well, Jews, he goes into the temple, sacrifices a pig on the altar of the Holy of Holies, is the most sacred site in Jewish religion, and declares himself divine, and says that the temple was no longer dedicated to Yahweh, but to Zeus, the chief Greek god. And this is, to say that it's the straw that broke the camel's back would be inaccurate. This would be like an anchor, an anvil that fell on the camel's back. There was no going back from this. So what you get is a family who come from a priestly line. We usually call them the Maccabeans, but it's really the Hasmonean family. So they revolt and they push the Greeks out, and they create a period of independence in Israel. Now, and so this is as good as it's going to get in this intertestamental period. And what happens at the end of this is that they're able, for the most part, to keep the Greeks out. Now, they flirt with the Persians for a little bit when the Romans come, but the Romans get bigger and bigger, and they come in. And so there's conflict here. There's civil war in Rome, all this sort of stuff. But for sake of argument, the Romans come and take over. And this is where the New Testament picks up. You get Herod is appointed by the Roman Senate, when it's still a republic, under Julius Caesar, to be, quote, the king of the Jews. Now remember, Herod is not a Jew. He's an Edomite, an Idumean. So he descends from Esau. And so now he is a convert to Judaism, but he's very syncretistic. He's more pro-Rome than he is pro-Jewish. So he'll throw a few bones to the Jews. He renovates the temple. This is the temple that Jesus cleanses. It takes over 60 years to do it. In fact, they don't really finish the temple fully until about 8 years before it's destroyed. I mean, it's going to take probably close to 10 years, up to 10 years, the state capital here. Imagine doing that for 50, 60 years. Now, it was open, obviously. A lot of the scenes we get in the New Testament comes from Herod's renovations. But that's neither here nor there. So this is the general summation of it. And then I wanted to show you this. The priesthood goes down here. They had one job, all right? And they were in charge of the religion of Judaism. So they offered the sacrifices, they made the prayers, they interpreted scripture, stuff like that. Up here is the house of David. They were the powers that be. So David's son and his son and his son and his son and his son, all the way down to Jeconiah, or Jehoiakim rather, but influence. The last really influential descendant of David in the Old Testament is Zerubbabel. He helps build power, whereas the priests are in a lot of power. If you read the New Testament, you can see this, can't you? Because who condemns Jesus to die? And the Hasmoneans are priests. This is really where it takes over. Out of the Hasmoneans is, in this period, you're going to get the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and whatnot. So they are a lot of priests who become the high priests. They are eventually appointed priests by the Greeks and later by the Romans. So they would fulfill the role. People stopped looking for the King of the Jews, the Son of David. There were people who they could read their Bible. Among them were the Pharisees, because they believed in the Bible, and they really emphasized the prophets, because the prophets made it clear, Son of David is coming. The Essenes, who are these mystics who go out in the desert and whatnot, they do the same thing. And so remember what happens is Herod dies in 4 BC, a match that gets that gets lit, and that really does things. Let's look at the Bible, New Testament, and see, with all this as background, the significance of Jesus as the Son of David. I do want to show this just real quick. They have James, the brother of Jesus' bones. Now, if you find that stuff fascinating, stay up all night tonight, and you're going to. It's really, really debated. I go back and forth on this. Some say it is him. Some say it's not. We're pretty certain we have Caiaphas, the high priest that condemned Jesus. Pretty sure we have his bones and his family's bones. Well, this gentleman, you have to go to a warehouse to find him. Dating it is, I couldn't find a good hard date. It is at least by 80, 70 when they stopped doing this. But this phrase right here, it's sort of on the side. It was meant to be a little note for the family. And it says, belonging to the house of David. So what is clear to us is this, beyond just our writings and everything that we have, but it's clear that there is this longing for the house of David to be restored. And with it come the restored kingdom of David and the independence of Israel. Son of David, the son of Abraham. Now, there's a lot that we could say about that. One, the language mirrors the book of Genesis. Many scholars divide Genesis by a certain phrase, and you'll find this is often said, it begins with a genealogy. I wonder if Matthew is picking up on that genealogy. We'll look at that. But Matthew wants you to notice 2 people in his genealogy. Very first verse. Number 1, that this Jesus is a descendant of Abraham. So he's a Jew. He's a Hebrew. The other is he's a descendant of David. He is of the house of David. So before we know anything else about Jesus from Matthew's pen, he is already setting us up for what matters most to him. Matthew, more than the other Gospels, wants you to know Jesus is the King. And he starts in the very first verse. This is the genealogy of Jesus, who is the son of Abraham, son of David. Now, what follows, particularly in verses 3 to 16, is a genealogy of Jesus. We're not going to read it. We did a whole series on this, by the way. But you'll notice it's broken down into 3 sections, and they should be pretty even, because each 14, 2, 7 times 2, 7 times 2. So you have the multiplication of 7 3 times. And repetition is important. So to repeat something 3 times is really important. So in order to get those numbers, Matthew has to skip a few genealogies. We know that, but you can see what he's doing here. He is beginning with Abraham, and he's concluding with Joseph. So you get here in verse 6, the wife of Uriah. Now notice there, in most of the other names, you don't get any description. It's just the dude's name Bob, and his son was Jimmy, and his son was Timmy. That's all you're going to get. But David, and Matthew wants you to know, he's the king. Which means, as a descendant of David, he has a claim to the throne of David. I mean, it's very evident what Matthew is doing. Then you can go down to verse 17. So all the generations from Abraham to David were 14 generations. And from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations. From the deportation to Babylon to the Christ, 14 generations. Again, 3 14 names. Okay, so So Matthew tells us that, and we can read that for ourselves. Now, the fact that Jesus was the son of David was a well-established belief in the early church. So we get this even outside of the Gospels. Let me give you just two examples. In Romans chapter 1, concerning his son, who was descended from David according to the flesh. All right? So Paul wants to make a big deal of this. For one, he's writing to Jewish believers. For Revelation, I, Jesus, have sent my angel to testify to you, or my messenger, probably a better translation there, to you about these things for the churches. I am the root and the descendant of David, the bright morning star. So in this one verse, you've got references to at least 3 different messianic prophecies. Descendant of David being an obvious one. The root of Jesse, Isaiah 11, I believe it is. And of course, bright morning star. That's Venus, by the way. Anyway, so you can see the reference to David. So this isn't just the Gospels promoting this. This is the message of Christianity, that their Messiah is a descendant of David. And what do we get in the rest of, well, the church has always promoted this, going all the way back to the early church. I won't bore you with quotations. But the rest of Matthew promotes this idea. We've looked at this before, so I don't want to wear you out. Think of a few examples. Jesus is born in Matthew 1. In Matthew 2, you get the Magi. What are the Magi looking for? They're looking for the king of the Jews. Now, there already is a king of the Jews. The Senate declared Herod the king of the Jews. So they go find the king of the Jews. And Herod, who's very paranoid, remember what we said between the year 7 BC to his death in 4, he's killing everybody. He killed one of his sons 5 days before his own death. He had his wife murdered because he was convinced that she was involved in some sort of not scandal, conspiracy to have him killed. I mean, he was killing everybody. He slaughtered so many people. He had some of the religious elites arrested while on his deathbed, and he gave the order that when he dies to slaughter all of them. They were in his palace in Jericho. We'll come back to Jericho here in a second. And fortunately, they just let him go. But he wanted people to mourn. When he died, he was just going to kill a bunch of people. He's not a good person. He sacked Jerusalem, killing a bunch of people in the process. He's not a good guy. So the Magi come, and they're looking for the king. And in the story Matthew tells, they find the king, not the one with the title, but the one in the manger, or in the house by the time they arrive. It's Jesus. And so you have this conflict between two kings. And what does Jesus do? He comes bearing and proclaiming a kingdom. John the Baptist proclaims the kingdom is coming. Jesus repeats what John the Baptist said in chapter 4. In chapter 9, it says Jesus went throughout the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. By the way, notice the connection between gospel and kingdom. Liberals try to separate those. I think that's a terrible idea. And so notice the kingdom is associated, not just what he's saying, but what he's doing. He's healing every disease and every affliction, but the emphasis is not just on who he heals, but what he proclaims. The two are related, and we've looked at that in the past. Matthew 10, these 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, so he sends them out 2 by 2, the 70 or 72, depending on your translation. Go nowhere among the Gentiles, enter no town of Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Proclaim as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And then there is Matthew 16, truly, truly, I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. I think this is primarily a reference to his resurrection and ascension. So this is just a quick summary. We could look at the kingdom parables and all that. Clearly, Jesus comes preaching a kingdom. But more than that, he is proclaimed not just a generic king, but a specific type of king. He's proclaimed as the son of angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream saying, skip genealogies, right? But Matthew wants to make sure you got the point. Joseph is a descendant of David. Same thing in Matthew 9. As Jesus passed on from there, 2 blind men followed him crying out, have mercy on us, son of David. Now, here we talked about this last week. David is a monarch. He's not a healer. But in the intertestamental period, as people read in their Bible, they begin to notice a few weird things about David. And some traditions came about David and Solomon in particular, is that they were messianic figures in the sense that they had power. So Solomon and David, it was claimed, could cast out demons. So we shouldn't be surprised by the time you get to the 1st century, the Israelites are hearing a son of David. He has power. And this is why Jesus is healing people, because this is what's being expected of the son of David. He can cast out demons. because no one else can. I mean, the priest can, of course, but the king can. That's what kings do. Theos, Lord, Master, Son of David, my daughter is severely oppressed by a demon. Again, notice, he casts out demons. David slayed Goliath. That's a demon, if you will. I mean, we can't chase that rabbit. And he soothed Saul's soul, so he dealt with demons there. Give you one more example. Behold, there were two blind men, story very similar to what we saw in chapter 9, sitting by the roadside. This is the story of Bartimaeus. We get the name right out, Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David. So you can see the language of monarchy, Lord, language of mercy, right? So he has power, and of course the monarchy title. And let's not forget what Mary was told by the angels. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David. Now, Luke never has Jesus sitting on an actual throne in Jerusalem. So either Luke isn't a very good storyteller, or we are to understand this kingdom is bigger than Jerusalem. The throne he sits on is right at the right-hand throne of the Father, because at the end of Luke's gospel, he's ascending into heaven. No wonder then, when Jesus arrives at his baptism and ultimately at his triumphal entry, there are these mixed emotions. Many are excited because rumors are going out about what this Son of David has done. He's got the right credentials. He's a rabbi figure. And he is coming saying he's bringing a kingdom. Not to mention his connection with John the Baptist. We'll probably look at that in a few weeks as it is. So look at a few examples of the excitement. In Matthew 12, all the people were amazed and said, can this be the Son of David? This is why all that history matters. When we read this, we're like, oh yeah, Jesus descended. Everyone was so happy about that. Well, some were. Because what they were looking for was the true Son of David, the true King of Israel, to set them free. Because what did you have under David and Solomon? Is you had an independent state of Israel. But the Romans, with Caesar and all that, right before Herod takes over officially, he has to kind of sack Jerusalem. A lot of the Israelites, particularly the priests, the Sadducees and others, they sided with the Parthians, for you history nerds. And so they were hoping the Parthians would push the Romans out. Of course, the problem with that is, well, maybe they could beat the Parthians. This is during the Civil War between Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. The problem with that is that you get rid of one devil, but you exchange that devil for another. So how do you know you're going to like the Parthians anymore you like the Romans? They don't. They just, I have this problem, let's get rid of that problem. We'll deal with this problem next. And maybe we can figure out this problem, we can be free from them. That's their thinking. We've got to get rid of these people. And then comes one who's healing the blind man, just on his way to the triumphal entry is the story of blind Bartimaeus. I think in all three synoptics, that's what he's doing. In John's gospel, he's raising the dead. He's raising Lazarus. And then the next chapter is the triumphal entry. So people are excited. Can this be the Son of David? Or Matthew 21, the crowds that went before him, that followed him. This is triumphal entry. Hosanna to the Son of David. Quoting Psalm 117, I think. That's not right. 136. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. This kicks off the last week of Jesus. It's royal language. The David has arrived. This is him. This is the one we've been praying for. This is the one the prophets have foretold. This is the one we've been waiting for. You better look out, Romans. And so given that there's all this excitement, that even though, you remember the chart, that the influence of the line of David was at its lowest, there was this bubbling hope that it'll all work out. God's going to raise up David. And the priests are going to be put back in the right place. And David's going to rule and reign. We've got the temple, then we can have the palace, and we can be independent again. And so you can see, people are excited. But not everyone is excited about this. Many feel threatened. Matthew 27, Jesus stood before the governor, Pilate. The governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" This is the only question Pilate cares about. Now remember, Pilate knows there's already a king of the Jews. In fact, there's 4 of them, technically, because Herod's kingdom became a tetrarch. He was an ethnarch, technically. He became a tetrarch. So his kingdom was broken down into 4 parts. And Jesus will go stand in front of one of them. And we meet some of the other ones. One beheads John the Baptist, and Paul will deal with some of them and whatnot. But Pilate wants to know the answer to one question. Are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus says, yep, that's me. And he says this bound by Roman chains, with Roman guards all over him before the Roman governor. And Pilate is just amazed by this. He's like, some king you are. Look at you. You're nothing. I represent the power of Rome. Caesar Augustus rules things right now. It's Rome at its, not its peak, but essentially. Matthew 27, a few verses later, twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and read his right hand. Kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews. The Romans don't want to hear this. Matthew 27, over his head, they put the charge against him, which read, This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. Again, this is Matthew's emphasis of the royalty of Jesus. What sort of king doesn't have a kingdom, but he has a cross? This befuddles the Romans and the message of Christianity. One more, verse 42. He saved others. They mocked Jesus on the cross. He cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Again, this is mockery. Let him come down now from the cross and we will believe him. Of course, he does come down from the cross and he comes out of the tomb. They still don't believe him. But what are they mocking? They're mocking, and this is the crowd, but among them are the priests who are threatened by any claims of a son of David taken to the throne because they lose their power. And Rome's not going to put up with this. Rome is content with giving priests power because priests aren't monarchs in their view of things. The priests are over here doing religious stuff. So if the Sadducees and the Sanhedrin want to maintain power, that's fine. So you can see that to some, there's excitement, but to others, this is a problem. Okay, so with that said, let's go back to the birth of Jesus. There is the King of the Jews. His name is Herod. And Jesus is born in an atmosphere where, although the line of David had virtually no influence or power, if you were a descendant of David, there was expectations upon you that you were born with. Again, I used this illustration last week. If your last name is Kennedy and you're related to the Kennedys, it's the best option we have here in America, or Bush, or even maybe like a Clinton or Trump now. There is certain expectations that come with that. You didn't ask for, you didn't seek, you didn't work for, but it comes with it. Now, this is those examples times infinity. Because on your shoulders is the hope of the entire nation against the power of Rome. And Jesus would have grown up in this atmosphere where everyone would have known who his daddy was, and who his daddy was, and who his daddy was, and who his daddy was. And so if you were a son of David, there was something, an honor that came with it, but also responsibility. So Herod dies in 4 BC. Jesus, again, between about 2 to 3 years old. And this was a rather chaotic time. In Matthew chapter 2, we looked at this last week. When Herod died, remember that Jesus and his family are in Egypt. This is when they find out news Herod's dead. Let's come back to the land of Israel. Egypt has a very large Jewish population. At one time, they had a temple there. We've got a lot of manuscripts of the Old Testament from there and other Jewish writings because there's such a large, I think outside of Israel, the largest population of Jews was in Egypt. I think the third largest was Rome. There was some more in ancient Babylon, but it's neither here nor there. When Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream, and Joseph, again, by the way, can I just point this out? Do you know anyone else named Joseph in Egypt that got a dream? Have you ever noticed that? Do you know anyone else in the Bible named Joseph in Egypt who got dreams? Yeah. Obviously, right? Yeah. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. We cannot chase this rabbit. It's hot enough as it is. But I just want to point that out. That's free. You put that in your back pocket, and after you're trying to figure out if we have found the ossuary of James, the brother of Jesus, you're going to look up all the parallels between Joseph of the Old Testament, Joseph, the father of Jesus. Yes, yeah. So rise, take the child and his mother, go to the land of Israel, for he thought the child's life or dead, so Herod's dead. He rose, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. Again, we looked at this last week. When he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea. So Archelaus he follows after Herod. It's Herod's son, okay? So he's one of the few that survive. Herod had like 9 wives. It's cray-cray. So Archelaus is the guy who assumed he would inherit the entirety of his father's kingdom. But he's in this awkward moment where Herod changed his will so many times. When he died, Augustus hadn't given approval of the last will and testament. So Archelaus was the heir, but Augustus hadn't approved it. Because remember, Herod's killing his sons. He's always having to update it. So Archelaus is in this, he's like king-elect. That's not a title. So he has to get approval from Augustus, but someone has to run things. So he's planned this balance. He has to prove to Augustus he should inherit the whole thing. So he has to lead, but he can't lead because he technically doesn't have the power. It's a rough spot for him. And so Archelaus is reigning over Judea in place of Herod. And so he was afraid to go there. Now he's afraid to go to Judea. Jesus isn't from Judea. He's from Galilee. It's a neat little detail, isn't it? He ends up in Nazareth. I'll have a map up here in a second. But he's going to Judea. I believe he's going back to Bethlehem. Now, so right away we're thinking, well, what's going on in Judea? Because something happens and he's going this way and he says, oh, I better take a detour and land somewhere else. And so he went and lived in the city of Nazareth so that it was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled that he would be called a Nazarene. Well, let me share you what was going on. There was a prophecy going around saying that once Herod dies, the Messiah will arrive. If you want to see this prophecy on your own, you can Google a book called The Testimony of Moses. It is usually called The Assumptions of Moses. Now, it's one of several other sort of prophecies that were spreading out, okay? Basically, this was an internet rumor. Now, how you date the assumptions of Moses and all that is a complicated issue beyond our point. By the way, the assumptions of Moses is quoted in the New Testament. It's in the book of Jude. Jude quotes from two non-biblical books, Enoch and the Assumptions. So that's free. You know, when Jude mentions that Michael the archangel fought Satan over the body of, that is nowhere in the Bible. It's found in the book, The Testimony of Moses. And so Jude is referencing that and quoting. It's not. Michael is, but they don't wrestle over Satan's body. Now, in Jude, he quotes Zechariah, the Lord rebuke you. But that story is not found in the Bible. Because you go to Deuteronomy, he's buried by God, and that's the end of the story. So neat little. Paul probably wrote at least 4 letters to the Corinthians. We have 2, and the other 2 are not. It's not. Now, there is another book called First Clement. If you take my Sunday school class at the end of the year, we're going to talk about First and Second Clement. It's written to the Corinthians from a guy named Clement of Rome. Yeah. I don't know from Jesus' mouth. I'm not sure. David is from Bethlehem. And again, I think Joseph has taken Jesus back to Bethlehem, the house of David. Yeah, so Archelaus has here's a map. I don't know if you can see it very well. So this is Galilee, this is Samaria, this is Judea, Idumea, and all that. We're not going to worry too much about it. Not as large as I'd hoped. I try to make it as big as I could. So this is Judea. So Egypt is over here. They look to be coming up here. I think that's Jerusalem there. Or that's Jerusalem. That looks like bigger letters. And at some point, they decide to go up the King's Highway all the way to Nazareth into Galilee. So it's a longer drive up there, if you will. So Herod dies, and there's this prophecy. And remember that Herod is dying, and people know he's dying. And early on, there's a rumor he's dying or that he's dead. So 2 Pharisees in Jerusalem, they had a large following. Their names are Matthias. So you have 2 Pharisees, Matthias and Judas, son of Cephas. At the temple, there was an eagle hanging up there. An eagle was a sign of Rome, much like it is of America. An eagle was a Roman symbol. So a few weeks or whatever it was before Herod dies, actually we know the date that they're executed because it was a lunar eclipse. Their disciples climb up there, take an axe, they chop down the eagle. Herod, though he's dying, right? The soldiers come in, they arrest everybody, all that. He attends Matthias and Judas's own trial. And he is basically the prosecuting lawyer. He condemns them to be burned. And a lot of scholars think he did this because the Pharisees believed in the afterlife, the Sadducees didn't, and the resurrection. And so if you're burned and not buried, can you be resurrected? And some think that's what he's doing. The other ones were like beheaded or something like that. So you have the slaughter of all kinds of people. Well, when this happens, Herod dies a few weeks later, of course, right? And riots break out in Jerusalem. Archelaus is now king, kind of, right? King in waiting. He has to deal with this riot because the Pharisees are mad about what Herod did to Matthias and Judas. And so by the end, they bring in the army, all that sort of stuff. About 3,000 Jews are slaughtered in the city. It would have been worse, except a bunch of Jews escaped and hid out in caves. Doesn't that sound familiar? Matthew 24. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel. Now remember, that is a reference, yes, to Daniel, but this has already happened. Antiochus IV is what led to the rise of the Hasmoneans. Jesus is going to happen again. And let's not forget that Pompey Magnus of the Romans came in and he desecrated the temple himself. Not to the extent that Antiochus did, but for a long time. But when you see this happen again, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, this is important, that those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Now, Jesus is not referencing this event with Herod, but the parallels are striking. Jesus grew up in the world where everyone knew when they're at the city gates, when they've come into the temple, your only place is to go hide in caves. And we found them there because, so they hid those scrolls in caves so the Romans wouldn't find them. And we didn't find them for almost 2,000 years. Okay, so that's one example. So this is happening right. Another guy, we got to move. You're probably tired of me talking about this. Simon of Pere, also known as Simon, son of Joseph. He had been a slave of Herod. He was declared king by his followers. He plundered and burned down the royal palace at Jericho, among other royal places. So he is like around here. Okay, so Jerusalem is a riot. Archelaus got to deal with that. And at the same time, in Jericho. Now remember, when Jesus comes into Jerusalem, triumphal entry, he heals blind Bartimaeus in Jericho. It's on the way there. So just a few miles north of Jerusalem is another riot. And so Herod's palace, where he had all those people that he found, and when they're done there, they go somewhere else and they burn all. It's eventually captured and he's beheaded. So he goes from slave to king. Oh, I forgot. Yeah, so let me show you a picture here. This stone is known as many think it's referencing Simon and Jericho, but that's neither here nor there. Let me give you a third figure, a guy by the name of Judas, son of Hezekiah. He was a bandit leader killed by Herod, or his son, after Herod's death. So what happens is, this is Galilee. I should have gotten just a map of Galilee. If you Google a map of Galilee in the time of Jesus, you'll probably see this. There's a city, it's the capital city of Galilee. You've never heard it because it never shows up in the New Testament explicitly. It's the city called Sepphoris. Now, remember, one of those Pharisees that chopped down the eagle, he was from Sepphoris. Sepphoris is within a few miles from Frankfurt. I was going to use Frankfurt as an example, from Nazareth. So this would be, like the west side of Frankfurt, basically, okay? So if you're in Nazareth, it's a little small town, the capital city of Galilee is right over there. And this guy named Judas, son of Hezekiah, he goes into the capital city, where Herod has a palace, he has all this stuff, and he raids the armory. And acting as a king, because he's the son of Hezekiah. Hezekiah was the son of David. And many think that he was claiming to be the son of David, and therefore a king. And he's raiding the army. He's going to go to war. And he causes some troubles. So much so, because you got all this going on down here, okay? Archelaus is down in Judea trying to deal with that. Who's going to deal with this up here? Now you got riots, you've got pillaging, you got all this. Well, the prefect, the governor, so the Pilate version of Syria, which is a different region of Rome, he comes in named Varus, and he just starts slaughtering people. So much so, every resident in Sepphoris, after he's done killing people, are made slaves. And basically the city is burnt to the ground, and he rebuilds it on the back of those slaves. Now, this is mere miles away from a family who are descendants of David working in the carpenter shop. And this is the world Jesus grows up in. He watches Sepphoris be rebuilt because someone claiming to be a son of David dared to go up against Rome. And here's Jesus, a descendant of David. Imagine what that must be like. You notice that Joseph, he doesn't go around preaching that he's the son of David. He's just a quiet carpenter from all we can tell. You can almost think Joseph has learned his lesson. Okay, that may be who my great whatever father is, but we got to keep things on the DL because they will slaughter us, they will enslave us, and they will burn our home to the ground. Let's just get on with our lives. So there's actually a fourth event. It's in the Samaria area. You can Google it for yourself. We got to stop at some point. By the way, Judas ben Hezekiah may be referenced in the New Testament in Acts 5. A Pharisee in the council named Gamaliel. Gamaliel was influential, particularly the Apostle Paul. Stood up and said to them, "Men of Israel, take care of what you're about to do." This is with the apostles. "For before these days, Theudas rose up, claiming to be somebody. Let's not worry about him. And about 400 men joined him. He was killed, and all who followed him were dispersed and came to nothing." Notice, this is another riot from another leader, claiming some sort of power, prophecy, royalty, whatever. Whoever this guy is, there's a lot of debate about him. But after him came Judas the Galilean. And some think this is Judas, son of Hezekiah, who went into Sepphoris, the capital city of Galilee. He rose up in the days of the census. By the way, I think this is connected to the census that Jesus was involved, but that's neither here nor there. Drew away some of the people after him. He too perished, and all who followed him were scattered. And those who stuck around the city were enslaved. If this is referencing the same event. So this is the world Jesus grew up in. You're thinking, okay, what does that have to do with anything? Okay, that's when Jesus was a little boy. He's a little boy. No one's going to come after little boys, even though Herod tried to kill all the little boys. But what I mean when he gets older, did this continue? I think it did. And the reason I can say this, for one, Jesus is executed as the son of David. He's executed because he claims to be king. But I don't know if you've ever thought of this, but Jesus is the son of David, yes. But so are his brothers. You ever thought about that? They're descendants of David too. Did they have any problems because of their ancestry? They did. And we know a little bit about them. So in the New Testament, we know of the apostles. We know of the deacons. And in general, that's kind of how we divide all the heroes in the New Testament. In general, I think that's fair to say. Stephen's a deacon. Paul is an apostle. Boom. What if there's another group we often overlook? This is a group that were the family of Jesus. They show up all over in the New Testament. James, for example, becomes the bishop of Jerusalem. He is arguably the most powerful man in the early days of the church. Remember when they have to meet to figure out what to do with the Gentiles becoming Christians? They meet in Jerusalem, and James is the one who overlooks that. He's known not as an apostle, but as the brother of the Lord. He is martyred, and his cousin, Simon of Jerusalem, who is the son of Cleopas, I believe, who shows up in the Gospels, he takes over James, so he's a cousin of Jesus. So we know the family of Jesus were powerful. Jude, the book of Jude, is by a brother of Jesus. And he was a missionary, if you will. So we know they show up. By the way, if you want to see this category, here's a good example. Do we not have rights to take along a believing wife? Paul's asking. As do the other apostles. There's a category. The apostles have wives. No one says anything. The brothers of the Lord has wives. No one says anything. In fact, Peter, Cephas is his Aramaic name. Peter has a wife. He's the most famous of all of us. You see the categories. Apostles, brothers. The apostles are not the brothers of Jesus. The brothers of Jesus are not apostles. So there is this line of people who they went around saying, yeah, that guy you crucified, that was my cousin, that was my brother, that was my great uncle. And they all were descendants of David. So guess what happens? According to an early church historian one of the most important figures we have in the history of the church, a guy by the name of Eusebius. He comes along and he tells us the story that in the days of, on two different occasions, Domitian was Caesar. He was a very brutal, violent man towards Christians. And then right after the destruction of Jerusalem, on two occasions, the descendants of David were hunted down. And even at one point, the great nephews of Jesus were arrested and put on trial, potentially to be executed simply because of their association with Jesus, but more importantly, their association with the line of David. What Rome concluded was, if you are a descendant of David, you have a claim to a throne, and we will not put up with it. And so we get these references throughout the early church that they were trying to kill the descendants of David. So what do you think it was like for Jesus to grow up? There was this honor that comes with it, yes, but also an expectation. And Jesus everyone around Jesus builds up what they think the Son of David ought to be. But he's nothing like what they had grown to expect. His kingdom is larger than Israel. His kingdom encompasses all the nations. And he won't just conquer the Romans, he'll conquer the grave, thus making him the true and better David. Or, as one of my favorite verses in the Bible says, Paul puts it this way: remember Jesus Christ, risen from the dead, the offspring of David. So I do think his title, again, we can't say specifics about what his childhood was like, but I do think we can infer a lot of things about what that would have been like and the pressures he would have been under, especially once he starts going around proclaiming that the kingdom of God was at hand. I hope you're not lost.
His brothers and sisters didn't believe it.
Not at first, nope.
Neither did the community around them.
Right. In fact, if you're looking for evidences of the resurrection, one of the strongest evidences, because we know James lived, and we know he was a Christian, and we can be certain he was Jesus' brother. And as such, one of the best arguments for the resurrection of Jesus is James. None of us here is convinced our sibling could ever be the Messiah. That's just natural. But James saw him alive after he knew he was dead. And his only conclusion was, yeah, that makes sense. Everything he said was true. And he went, and he was the leader. These are all carpenter kids. They should all be carpenters. Leaves all that behind to lead a church. And he dies to lead a church. One of the first martyrs. It's amazing. You can add Jude on top of that and Simon later on. So Jesus is the Son of David. Not something you go around saying in that culture. You just don't say that. I mentioned Robert E. Lee last week, that he could, his descendants could be king of America. Those guys struggle with their name. They do, because of what is associated with their ancestor.
I'm related.
You're related to Robert E. Lee? I thought so. You just...
Somehow I'm not quite sure. My mom's looking into it. My grandma was a Lee, and one of her relatives broke into it. I figured we are in the line somehow.
Yeah. So I've got an aunt, what you're describing. Supposedly we're connected to Jesse James.
Yeah.
His parents...
My grandma was robbed by him in Kansas.
Rocked?
Robbed.
Robbed. Okay, I thought like rocked like a baby.
Like great-grandma, my great-grandma.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah.
It is.
That's something I'm related to know.
Yeah.
There's always one, and it's always Dawn. Right.